All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Good evening, everyone. We're in different time zones. I think I'm the one furthest in time. I'm in Chicago. My name is Brian Kahn. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Engagement at Full Spectrum Features. We're an organization based in Chicago dedicated to increasing representation in front and behind of the camera. I am a brown-skinned South Asian Latino. I identify as a gay man. Behind me, there is a brick wall with some blue tapestry and a row of strategy board games that keep me very entertained after a stressful day. Um, Before we dive in, we want to acknowledge that tonight's event takes place on unceded ancestral lands of the indigenous people of San Luis Obispo County, the Chumash people, who are the past, present, and future stewards of this land. The San Luis Obispo Film Festival will continue to use its platform to showcase indigenous storytelling and honor the beautiful land on which we gather. You can learn more about the indigenous heritage of that area by going to native-land.ca. And I also just want to acknowledge that I am currently sitting in Chicago, which is part of the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations. Lastly, I just want to make a statement that it's important to understand the history of the lands we occupy as our places and our places within that history. Colonialism is not a thing of the past, but an ongoing process, and one that many people around the world continue to participate in and be subjected to. At this time, I invite any members of the audience who want to either acknowledge in silence or share in the chat. Feel free to do so. I am very, very excited to be moderating this conversation today. We have an incredible panel put together by the team at SLO to talk about building racial equity from the bottom up. I'm going to read just very brief bios. Those are available on the website, so I'm gonna give you the cliff notes because I know that you'll want to read a lot more about all of them. Our first is Sohini Sengupta. She is the group creative director at Amazon Studios. She is an award-winning creative director of numerous theatrical, television, and streaming advertising campaigns. Currently a group creative director at Amazon Studios. Her campaigns include Birdman, 12 Years a Slave, Black Swan, Ex Machina, Dope, Room, Milk, Slumdog Millionaire, and many others. Hello, Sahini. Thank you so much for joining today.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We also have Ivette Rodriquez. She is the founder of American Entertainment Marketing. Ivette is a veteran entertainment strategist with 25 plus years experience specializing in marketing and PR campaigns for feature films, television series, and documentaries. She has worked on a diverse slate from major studio films to independent and prestige titles in both English and in Spanish. And you can read more about Yvette, and we're going to hear a lot more about her very shortly. And last but not least, we have Fanshen Cox, who's an actor, an educator, a writer, and a producer. She is an award-winning playwright, actor, producer, and educator. She recently completed touring her one-woman show, which I want to hear so much more about, titled One Drop of Love. She is also a producer and development executive at Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's Pearl Street Films. And she served as a Peace Corps volunteer. Oh, there's a lot more to I can't fit it all in 40 minutes. Just so the audience knows what to expect, and we're gonna talk for roughly about 30 45 minutes, and then I really want to create space for the audience to ask the questions that you want to hear. I don't have the privilege of seeing if you're nodding, if you're like interested in where the conversation's going. So I want to make sure that we talk about the things that you want to talk about. Yvette and Fanshen, I did not give you a chance to say hello, but if you want to take a moment.
I'll say hello, and I thank you, Brian, for modeling, kind of describing what you look like in your background. So I'll quickly say I'm a light-skinned Black woman with curly hair, short curly hair as of yesterday. And there's a fuzzy white, comfortable thing behind me that's like I don't know, it's fake, but it's I don't know, fuzzy thing on my chair behind me, and then a couple doors behind that and a white wall.
Thank you, Fanshen.
Just hi everyone, and thank you for that, Brian. That was a lovely intro, and I appreciate that. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. All right. So what we were thinking today is this question that was that the panel is titled is a very, very big question. There are so many layers to even dive into that. And so what we're hoping to do today is I think when we talk about racial equity, diversity, and representation, we often hear mostly about the actors that we see on screen. And so what I'm hoping we can talk about today, which should be pretty insightful, is thinking much broader about the whole life cycle of a film. There is so much more than the 21 days of production that I think is what we hear the most about, and then that big, either festival premiere or theatrical launch. And I think everyone here provides a different piece of that puzzle that really makes that whole life cycle of a film. And everyone here can also share from their own experiences and what they're observing in their work, the inequities and racial equity inequities, and the battle that is every day and overcoming some of those. So we're hoping to also illuminate some of those things that you may have never heard of that happens in creating a film. And getting it out there. So my first question is for you, Fanshen. You're working much earlier in the process. I mean, even before production, there's all of this development work that happens in just, identifying work, developing that work, and getting it greenlit. So I was hoping that you could paint a picture a little bit for us of what that looks like. And then also maybe we can talk about the work that you're trying to do with increasing representation in that space.
Sure. Yeah. So development work it was a hard one to start after having done different things for a long time, because I kept asking everyone, what do you do? And everyone's like, there is no one answer in terms of how a project gets made. And that was a really hard lesson to learn, that there isn't, a very clear path. But then also, once you realize that the great thing is you can find a story anywhere, then suddenly the whole world is open up to you, unless the story is about Black and Brown people, because it might be open to you and interesting to you, but then it means you do have this extra work to do to then get that story out into the world. But I find stories from reading books, or seeing what people are talking about. I find stories from friends who were at a party and they just, well, not anymore, not in the last year, but they'll just tell me about something and I'll go, that sounds like an incredible story. And so there are so many different ways that a project can come into the development space. And I say that to be encouraging, which is that there are lots of ways that a story can be told and be pitched eventually as a TV show or a film. So stories matter, your stories matter, tell stories so that we can hear your stories and find ways to help tell them. My work around diversity, equity, and inclusion is I co-authored a document called The Inclusion Rider, and I did this in conjunction with a civil rights attorney named Kalpana Kodagal, and with a data analyst from USC named Stacy Smith, and her whole team at Annenberg at USC. And this tool is for, at the time when we developed it, it was for actors, specifically A-list actors, to take into their negotiations with a studio early on in the process of hiring and say, it's important to us that you hire a representative number of cast and crew, that it's inclusive of what the world looks like. Those two jobs are tough. Yes, please, Ryan.
Sorry,
No, I
sorry,
should.
Fanshen.
Yes, please.
No, you're fine. I just want to unpack a couple things because
Sure,
there
please.
was so much incredible information
Yes.
there. Two things came to mind as you were sharing. It made me think of why this idea of an inclusion writer is so revolutionary. And just to give some context for those of you who I think if you go to film school and you're like go down that path, you like see this day to day. But to give that picture for people not in film school, the way production works is such a like you hire your buddies.
Exactly.
Right? Like these are the people you get a job, and if you're in charge of hiring that assistant below you, you hire that person who went to school with you, you hire that person who you worked with on that last job, and it immediately creates a incredible barrier of inequity, and it makes production, it makes it very easy for them to not have to look out.
Yep.
Please keep going, Fanshen.
Well, exactly. And so the inclusion writer is there to say, there's a problem. This is something that one of many tools, by the way, because I have so many colleagues that have been in this industry for a long time doing lots of other ways, as Sohini and Ivette will attest to as well in their work. But this is one tool that a production can use to remind themselves to do better, to be mindful as they do their hiring, so that it's not your buddy, because if your buddy's a white male, which is likely because that's who has traditionally made those decisions, you've got to take some extra time and extra steps to actually think about who else you should be hiring in these positions. And so one of the things we're working on an update to the inclusion writer, which one kind of responds to all of the pushback we've gotten over the last 3 years, everything from, oh, we're already doing it. And so the response is, well, great, then add this as well, right? It can't hurt to have another commitment. And then another response we have now is that we're adding accountability measures. So once you've agreed to sign on to the inclusion writer, or even if you say you're doing it, we're still asking you, even after the fact, to sign the inclusion writer so that we can go in with a team, analyze your data, and let you know where you fell short around the hiring targets on the inclusion writer. And then we ask you to donate funds based on the places where you fell short into organizations that support underrepresented filmmakers. So that way it's a win-win. We don't want you to have to do it because we want you to just hire us. But if you don't, we're going to hold you accountable for it. And that's been a piece that's been missing for a long time, is holding all of these folks accountable for what the industry looks like right now.
Thank you so much, Fanshen. It makes me think, I'd love to just dive a little bit. One quick question, just going back to that development piece, about the barriers of people's stories getting on people's desks.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one thing that like I've reflected a lot upon as we seek out money or as we apply for funding for a project, it's this like incredible battle of convincing someone that Black and brown stories are worth it. And I think it's typically convincing a group of people on the other side of the table who are typically white and typically men, that this story about, a coming of age story about a brown kid is worth it. And so I'd love to just maybe hear a little insight of.
Well, the great news is there's a report out just this morning by McKinsey that talks about the $10 billion that have been left on the table due to not representing Black stories. And these are stories like Black Panther. They're saying, you take the money that these films made and imagine if all of the resources had been put into these films that get put into films about white people, films about men. There's all this money on the table. So it has been a lie that the industry has told over and over again that our movies don't make money. I mean, one of the big problems is the word minority. There are white people in this industry that use the word minority. We are not a minority. We are a global majority. And so they're selling things overseas, but you're telling us we don't sell overseas, but our faces are a lot more common than your faces are overseas, right? So we just have to constantly push back on this myth that we don't make money. We do. The gatekeepers have kind of perpetuated a lie about it. And that's where obviously Ivette and Sohini their jobs are so important, because when I'm even in the early stages of development, I'm needing to think about what they will do with this information. And I love to know that I've got women there that will be sharing this story with the world, or brown people there, because I know it's going to be in safe hands once it gets to that point.
Thank you so much, Fanshen. And I think that's a great place to now talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing, Sohini. I'm curious about what are the things that you're encountering at your work and the day-to-day, and like the changes and the work that you're trying to do with revision, like where the need to do that is stemming from.
Yeah, so the part of the industry that I work in is marketing, and marketing is layered in so many areas, right? So the thing that audiences see first is always either a trailer or a key art or a clip from a film. And what marketing does is that if you don't have marketing on any film or series, your audiences don't get to see it. So our job comes in the beginning, in the middle, and the end, to sustain, to bridge, to go continue on, and it keeps going on and on long after production is done, right? And we work very closely with production, which is also why on the flip side, it's important for some of us that we have representation on production and development as well. But by the time it gets to marketing, we're not mirroring, our industry, specifically marketing, is not mirroring the audiences that we're marketing to. So for example, let's just take Black Panther. If you're marketing Black Panther to whatever audience, to all broad audiences, to a multicultural audience, to a global audience, but everybody that's doing that work is potentially white, then our conditioning in marketing is being conditioned. So what you're seeing, what I'm seeing, is through the lens of white people doing that marketing for us. So the work that we're trying to do at Revision is to say just unequivocally that you can't have diversity in our industry without actually having diversity in our marketing industry, because otherwise the lens always is going to be through the lens of a certain hue. And to Yvette's point, when, a lot of times marketing will tokenize different audiences. So in the same way that, in the same way that Fanshen was talking about, we talk about these audiences as minority. A, we're not a minority, but B, when you tokenize us and you say, I'm going for an AA audience, I'm going for a Latinx audience, I'm going for an Asian American audience, then you're speaking really, really tiny to a portion of us, because again, we're not a monolithic group. And so what we watch, everybody watches. So it's really important for marketing to reflect and mirror exactly the audience that we're talking to. And so that's what Revision is doing. And Revision is an organization that I co-founded, and it's a nonprofit. And what it does is it creates 4 pathways and a place for resources so that those in marketing can actually do actively a few things. One is mentorship, not just mentorship for young kids, but one huge thing is that young kids do not even know our industry exists. So if you're an artist and you're drawing or you're into comics, you could actually make that into key art, into art that you see digitally on social. If you want to be an influencer and you're loving makeup and hair, you can actually be a makeup artist. You could be hair on our production or even in marketing specifically. So we're doing mentorship in a way that actually speaks to young kids so that they realize that this industry is actually available for them. I'm sure we all have our personal stories of how this industry was introduced to us. And I'm sure it wasn't because our uncle told us that it was there, or we were playing golf or something like that with somebody and they hired us, right? Then the second part of it is internships. And internships is really important for entry-level positions. Our industry, you don't need a PhD, you don't need an MBA, you don't even need to go to college. You just need to be interested. It's a skill-based industry. So internships are really important. And the second part of mentorships is that once you actually get one little toe into this industry, someone needs to look out for you. This is the only way that you actually make it in our industry. Someone actually needs to look out for you. And what you were saying before, Brian, about, it's usually you hire the people that you know, so the industry starts looking very much one palette. Once you break that mold of, okay, I'm not going to just culturally talk to somebody because they culturally may know what I'm talking about, but I'm going to invest in people's talent. I'm going to see that person who may be an introvert, who may not have gone to the same college as I did, who may not have even gone to college, but to actually spend time for mentorship and sponsorship and make space at the table for another person of color. And making space means that you're actually including their voice at the table and not just because they're status quo. And that's a really important distinction as well. So we're working on all these pathways with all agencies and with studios. And what we're hoping is 10 years from now, we're not having this conversation anymore because it's going to look very different. That's the goal.
That's incredible, Sohini. And it really makes me think about, again, the, I think when we talk about racial equity, I think there's a lot of myths. I think there's a lot of unawareness of like what it is that we're talking about. And I think so many of the things that Revision is tackling are so key. Like I think, again, even as we talk about internships, I think that's such an interesting, like, again, like this is the model of how we grow in our careers, how we grow in any industry. But when we think about it from an equity standpoint, how challenging it is, like not just to get the internship, that alone and it's battle on its own, but just think about the incredible amount of privilege that one needs to have in order to work 20 to 30 to 40 hours a week unpaid.
Yeah. So that's definitely a shift. Internships should be paid. Internships are skill-based. If you don't have a car, how do you provide transportation? If you're not going to a college, how do you make an internship not about college credit? There's so many different pathways to actually look into that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of what you were mentioning as you were talking about the marketing campaigns and the importance of designing those campaigns, it really makes me think about the looking at this from a capitalistic point of view about all the money that's on the table and all the this racial equity work can be profitable. Like it's there because like people like Black and brown people, like we watch movies.
Plenty of evidence.
Yes. Yeah. We don't need more evidence.
Right.
Yes.
And so
but unfortunately, there's a lot more evidence that racism even trumps profit. So.
Yeah. Well, and this kind of leads me to want to hear a little bit more from you, Yvette. You have obviously you've seen the gamut. I think it's incredibly inspiring, that you left the studio world, started your own company. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about like what were you seeing then that inspired you, like, I need to go do this on my own.
Yeah, thank you. First, I just want to make a quick comment and then I'll share that story. But I think that what we're talking about here, because we're all people of color, but really what we're talking about here is quality of life for all of us, right? Like what has transpired during this pandemic and during this summer, it is truly, it has been horrifically like eye-opening. We already know that there's an issue, but what we're talking about when we talk about racial equity is it's basically and I'm drawing a blank of what I'm saying because I'm a little tired and I apologize. But I just think that everybody wins when we do this work, right? Everybody, right? Every single person on planet Earth and in this country wins. We're not asking for any. If we all can be equally human beings, we're all human beings. We want the same things. We all laugh. We all love, right? We all have pain. But the only way you know us is how you see us on television and in film. So when there's images being perpetuated of us, negative images. So if you don't have Latinos if you don't know me, you may think that I'm ABC. You may not know anything about me, or you don't, because Latinos are not a monolith at all. We're from white to black. We are rich and poor. There's so much diversity to who we are specifically, and I specialize in this community, so I can speak to that. But it's important, number one, for us to see ourselves in the way other people see us. And that's the work, really. It's like, that's why it's important that we're in every single room and that we're participating in everything from writing to directing to producing, development, the whole thing. Why? Because we have to be in that room so that we can help tell the true story, the authentic story, to show the world who we truly are, not who other people say we are. So there's a lot of translators out there, and they're blocking the story across the board, across every single room. So like for me, that's really the work through La Collab, which is the organization that I co-founded with Beatriz Acevedo and Mayor Garcetti. So that's like the work. I mean, then I'll talk to you about AEM and my company, which is the marketing PR firm. But specifically, as we're talking about racial equity, I just want to let everybody know that we all win. So what we're asking for, it's simple. It's really easy. It's not brain surgery. It truly isn't. But we have to, but the work has to get done. And so when I hear about this like inclusion rider, I'm just like, inclusion writing, you can sign it, but nobody, and I'm not saying I love the inclusion writing. I'm just saying, like, in my experience across the board, it's a lot of this. A lot of this is happening in every studio and everywhere. It's like nobody wants the pain of making change. Right. And so I'm going all over the place, but that's sort of what
chime in with the idea of standpoint theory, because I've been thinking about this a lot and talking about it a lot in like diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces, that so the kind of the more privileged you are, the more limited your perceptions are. Whereas the more marginalized you are, the broader view you have of everything. So that's something that I think the industry needs to think about as we look for storytellers, is that folks with marginalized experiences actually know all of the stories. They've had to learn the stories of the cis white male to protect ourselves, to to live, to survive, to
exist. Yes.
To exist. But the cis white male does not need to look towards these other stories. And so we're saying, yes, this is a broad appeal, right? But that the people who really are in the position to tell these stories are the most marginalized among us.
And that's why it's so important to look at this from a lens that it's not what you were saying about not being a monolithic group. Just me personally, I'm a product of immigrants. My parents are South Asian immigrants. However, I was raised in West Covina, so most of my community is Latina, and they all thought I was from, a very specific part of Mexico. I learned that really quickly, and I learned that culture really quickly. But then also I grew up watching television that my parents would let me watch that was only Cosby, and I listened to hip hop. So my experience is very layered, and it's not monolithic. I'm not just a South Asian woman talking about South Asian things all the time. And to your point, what you were saying, Fanshen, it's just, I've had to learn many different cultures, like we all have, but then in work and in school and in professional life, you have to learn a very specific language.
Well, it's exactly why I wrote my play, One Drop of Love, because I had wanted to be an actor since I was like in the Nutcracker in my bilingual school production in second grade, right? I was like, this is the thing I'm going to do. However, you know, walking into a room and them not understanding the Black experience and all the hues that make up the Black community and the Black experience, and then having to try to explain that, or being offended, honestly, by people who don't know that experience and try to pigeonhole, and even offending myself by asking my agent, you know, did you send me out for white or Black today, and deciding how I'm going to wear my hair and how I'm going to speak. That's what pushes you to then go ahead and write your own story, which the truth is, I think we're still in a place where that's the best way to get our stories out, is for us to tell our own stories. But that is what the industry pushes a person to do if you're not going to buy into their very limited notions of Blackness and mixedness and, you know, all of our identities.
I'd love to just explore just for a second further, because I think a lot of the people tuning in today are filmmakers, and they're thinking about like putting their stories out there. And I'd love to just hear maybe from Sohini or from Ivette a little bit more about. I think filmmakers hear, you know, more no's than yeses about like there's an audience out there for your movie. And so maybe if you can just shine a little bit of a light of like, is that audience really out there? Is there a Latino audience for Latino stories? Where are they, and why are people telling us that they're not there?
Yvette, you want to take this one specifically about a Latino audience, which is so layered?
I'm sorry. I was muted, and that's so. I'm sorry. You'll have to ask me the question again. I don't know how I would answer that one exactly. I'm serious.
I think I was having my own monologue. That's okay.
Yeah.
Do you want me to repeat it?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the perspective of the filmmakers that are tuning in, that are, you know, as Fanshen described, the I don't want to say the easiest, the best, if not the only way for them to get their story out there is for them to produce it themselves and reach the community that they're making it for, that they want to talk to, that can resonate with that experience. And also, you know, just get their stories out there in general. And I'm thinking a little bit more about, or I'd love to hear from you about it. Is that audience out there? How do we find them? And why are they telling us that they don't exist?
Okay. Well, the audience is out there. We're human beings, and we all consume content. So the Latino audience, no, it's not out there. Here's what I would say to filmmakers. That doesn't make sense. Okay, ready? So tell your story and make it authentic to you. Tell me your story, because your story in its specificity is actually universal. That's how you connect with people. Don't try to make a story or write a story for an audience. That's where the disconnect happens. Like, just what's the story you want to tell, and be as authentic as possible to that story. And then more and more people will identify with it. I mean, that's what I would say to filmmakers. I get a lot of films, as you can imagine, and people want me to watch their films, and you can tell that there was so much thought. They were trying to do so many things, and instead, and actually, it takes away from the film, and from the film really truly resonating. So I wouldn't go out and say I want to make a Latino film. I would say I want to make a film, and what is that film about? And your story is your story, and humanity is universal. So just tell us your story, and that, I think, is what I would like to see. Folks do, is just try to really tell your story, because there's only one you.
And for the second part of that question, what you were saying is, why do they tell us that these audiences don't exist? If you're talking about traditional ways that audiences are accounted for from a theatrical model, then what they will say is that from a theatrical, again, this is pre-COVID, and let's just talk theaters for a second. Theatrically, they'll say that a certain population goes to see theaters. That's not necessarily true, right? It's about how you reach out to different communities, all that. It's also about like affordability. What are you doing to go to the theater? Theaters are expensive, and a lot of people have families and it's really hard to get to theaters. But if you're talking about the streaming world, your audience is everywhere. So it's not just about a Latinx audience or, AA audience or an Asian American audience. It's about the fact that what your story is going to speak to can speak to, again, somebody who is 62 in Iceland, somebody who's 21 in Brazil, somebody who is 35 in America, and it's a universal theme that they're talking to rather than looking at it from an audience perspective. But it's more about your taste preference and what you prefer to watch. But theatrically, that's a totally different model, which is why more and more we're going away from that, right?
Yeah, and I always like to say, I mean, I don't mean to make this sound like, oh, it's easy, just go out and tell your story. But I'm sure Yvette and I think are probably around the same age. We can attest to the fact that there truly was a time when the only way you could get distribution was to go through this horrible gatekeeping kind of, by people that don't look like you or understand you. Now there are ways for you to get your stories out there and get eyeballs on them, and such that we learn about them because we're out there looking for you. You have opportunities to know whether your story resonates kind of with a larger audience or even with a niche audience by putting it up on YouTube or even just clips of it or a trailer of it. You have this opportunity. Take advantage of that, because then when you go to pitch it to the gatekeepers, it matters if you can say, these are all the eyeballs that I got on this project, or, or this community decided to create a social impact campaign based on my project because it was important to them. You can take that into your pitch, and that could help you get more visibility for the project.
So we're getting some questions from the audience. One of the attendees, first name Rocky, is sharing a story about how they run a queer women of color owned production company in LA. They've never promoted themselves as that, but they've been fortunate to create multiple TV series and films. And they're saying, we hear about the desire of the industry to be inclusionary. However, we don't know of any opportunities by networks that would allow us to pitch to them. Yeah, and there's a second part to that question that I think is a great part, but I want to maybe just tackle that for just a second, about like, where are these opportunities? Where do people look? And I think we hear a lot about like the Sundances and the South bys, but maybe if one of you can illuminate a little bit of what, I think there's this myth about like, I don't know, the big pitch or the like secret room. But if one of you could illuminate that.
Well, I mean, I'm reading this, and so I'm reading it a little bit different. I'm reading that they actually are, that they're wondering if there's an opportunity specifically for them to go and pitch, right? They have agents, don't they? Or they have a successful production company. We can't hear them, right?
Yeah.
But I think that they were asking specifically about that. Did I misunderstand that? Because
it's possible. I'm trying to multitask, Ivette.
Oh, no, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm just wondering, because it seems like they're asking if they should promote themselves, if they should go out of their way to say, hey, I'm queer and
Totally.
We're women of color. Are there going to be more opportunities for them because they've never used that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. That was the part two I was going to come back with.
Oh.
But that's totally fine if we want to talk about that. I think that it brings up an interesting dichotomy, right? Like we talk about like make these universal stories. You know, we were just talking about like don't try to make the story to fit this like certain audience. Yet I think again, there's a lot of opportunities that I think are like incentivizing this idea of like marketing yourself as, you know, a queer woman of color run company and like pushing that as like the force. So I don't know, are there thoughts on that? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it going
I
anywhere?
think it's similar to what Yvette said, which is like the story is what matters. And the story tells us your sensibilities. The story tells that if it's authentic, it's because it's coming from your voice and your identity. And and because you've said that you have made a lot of films and things, I would be concerned that you might be trying to take away work from others who are still trying to do that by, you know, asserting yourself in terms of your identity. We'll know it from the stories you're telling. I mean, I cannot believe when I get pitched a show about white people in Boston. I get it because that's what Matt and Ben have done, but you couldn't have possibly looked me up and thought that it would be a good idea to pitch to me a show about white people in Boston. You know what I mean? And I say that to say for your production company, I hope it's clear from the work you're doing, from the content you're producing, what's important to you. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be in you asserting your identity. It needs to come out in the story.
Authentically, right? And if the question is, are studios looking for authentic stories such as that? Yes, there are studios looking for that. Is it everybody? Probably not. Is it more difficult? Yes, it is. But if the question is, are studios looking for stories that delve into that experience or any experience that's authentic to that production company, then yes, there are. There's Netflix, there's Amazon, there's Universal, there's a lot of studios, bigger studios that are looking for that. There's smaller studios that want to do productions as well. There's Macro, there's where Fanshen works, there's Hello Sunshine, there's Array, there's a whole host of, there's LeBron's new Spring Hills, you know, there's a lot of other production companies that are looking for opportunities in that way as well.
I would say that those production companies are run by people of color, but specifically like in the networks and in the studios, what I can tell you is, yes, they're taking meetings. I speak to a lot of the guilds. I speak to Latinos in all the guilds, right? They have their monthly meetings. And so what I'm hearing from them is, wow, this is amazing. We're getting invited to come in and pitch like crazy. This is amazing. And nothing happens. Why? Because they're pitching to people that don't get the story. So, but they could say, hey, they came in, but we didn't get it because there was no one that can truly identify with these stories because they're putting them through their gaze and their lens, right? So again, like, it's like, yes, there's an opportunity. I have to now translate that opportunity through my world and how I see the world, talking about the white man running the room. And so it's like, yeah, I don't see that. Who would watch that? Like, so I think that you know, studios and networks probably they want to do it, but yeah, it's slow coming because truly it's the same thing. There's a translator in between the story and the person who green lights and the storyteller. So
I think that's a great point. You know, it makes me think also as we are you know, as you were describing, so like naming some specific companies that are producing this type of content, it makes me wonder again about the barriers of entry. I'm going to assume that they're not getting scripts randomly from individuals emailing, but a lot of it is coming through agents, right? If not all of it. And then what are the gatekeeping layers to going and getting an agent, and you know, all the pieces of the puzzle in that realm as well. And it makes me think of again the importance of the work that all of you are doing of putting people of color in all these other branches or steps, or however you want to think about the ecosystem of the film's life cycle. Fanshen, it looks like you have a comment.
Well, I was
on
just gonna, I'd love to name some places. I don't tend to take pitches from agents. I generally take pitches, for example, from Film Independence Labs. So Film Independent is a great organization. If you are a filmmaker and they encourage this kind of authentic storytelling, underrepresented stories. And then if you go through their labs, which are competitive, but again, they are pushing for our kind of stories. So they're competitive and you should be up to par in terms of what they're looking for, like skills in audio and skills in lighting, right? Like those are basics that everybody's story should have. But those are the pitches that I love to take. So they've got Fast Track as an example. Those are my favorite times to kind of sit and take those pitches, and I bring those pitches into the company. And I go to, there was this film festival I just attended for kids from 8 years old to 24 years old. I seek those out. That's where I want to find people telling stories. First of all, young people, absolutely, because they're dictating where the future is going to go and who's going to be watching things. So I think that's something that I'm seeing starting to change, is where we find the stories. So again, you do have opportunities. Get yourself into festivals, get your work put up online, make really solid relationships with the people that you're producing with now, even if it's a short film, maintain those relationships, because someone in that circle is going to end up doing well. And if you're good in people with integrity, you're going to bring the others along with you.
There's a question about pitching. The question reads, for aspiring filmmakers, their pitch is often the first marketing that has to be done for their film. Can you give any guidance about how to think about the pitch? And I think we've heard a lot about like authentic, a lot about, telling stories that are real to your experience. I guess I'd be curious, again, I think this relates to a little bit of that earlier question about this, like, marketing it, right? And maybe where's the balance?
I know I'm different, but I can tell you that, as you know, Sohini mentioned some of the places that are now like Array and Macro. There are places that are looking for these things. As an example, if I look at a pitch deck, and I'll just quickly say, unfortunately, we have less and less time to read an entire script that you sent us. And so what we're asking for now is a deck that's like a PowerPoint, a really beautifully visual telling of your story with some text, but like the most important text of your story. But when I get a pitch deck, if this story is just about some folks on a farm, and all those folks are white people, because you can put your sample characters in it, right? And you can put, I don't look at it anymore, right? So, or if I'm developing a project with a pitch deck, I'm like, I want the darkest skinned people you can find as the samples of what we're going to put in this pitch deck. So the good news is we are in a place where there are people that are open to and excited about seeing darker skinned folks in pitch decks, seeing Afro Latinx people or Afro Latinos. I'm learning which one is the right way to say it. And right, like there are those of us who are pushing for that and wanting to see that more. So utilize that visual opportunity you have to make the pitch deck look like what the world actually looks like.
And that's your tone, your cast, and Fanshen, I mean, you know this better than anyone, but the most important words on it is probably what your logline and synopsis is. Like, what's the hook for this? Like, what is this about? In the simplest way possible. Especially if you don't have time to read scripts. You might read the script if the synopsis gets you.
Thank you so much, Sohini, because that's so much more important than a lot of times people will put their sample actors and actresses on the first page, and it's, you know, it's, I don't know, Keanu Reeves, and I'm like, what is the story you want to tell me? That's where you should spend all of your time, is like, how do you get your story in that elevator pitch, you know, those 3 or 4 sentences? How do you grab somebody to want to know more about the story? And then good
yeah.
visuals that don't have to be people or A-listers faces. They should be visuals that make
Of
it
tone, color, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And look, that travels with you. So that could be your pitch deck, but that travels to me when I'm doing marketing and I'm doing my own deck to actually market your series or your film. So that's always so important, because then it's your vision and it's your story. And I want to use your words.
And if you have the money, hire a person of color to help you. If you don't have the visual skills and you have the, you know, you wrote it and you're text heavy and you want, then hire a person of color to help you create the pitch deck.
So there's a great question looking at the future that's asking, are you optimistic? Have you seen enough change in the last 10 years to think that the next generation of studio owners will get the power and responsibility? We'll have the power. Maybe they mean like making these changes that we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say I'm optimistic. Absolutely. The work, I mean, you know, have we come a long way in 10 years? I mean, no and yes. You know, but we're going in the right direction right now, I believe. And you know, there's a lot of disruption happening across the board, and it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. And you know, us included, everybody's in disruption mode right now. But this is coming. And I think that at the end of the day, now I'll talk about finances, right? At the end of the day, you can't win, right? People of color will be, you know, the majority. We really are the majority in the world, but the majority in this country in less than 2 decades. So the health of this country, of the U.S., which is where, you know, where I'm at, depends on all of this, actually. This is like, it's that important, actually. I mean, it like when we talk about race and equity, I know everybody's talking about it, but it truly is important, because it's going to be how we all can have a good life together, and that we're not all divided, looking at each other through this view of what Hollywood has been perpetuating. Like, we must come together, all people, right? Everybody must come together and be first humans and Americans. Like, that's what we have to do. And that, I'm hopeful about that.
I follow this group, and I mentor with a group called Color Entertainment. So if there's anybody out there who's interested in executive positions, this is a great organization. And they have executive assistants, and they go all the way up through executives. But they have a Facebook page, and the Facebook page reposts announcements of executives who have been hired. In the last 6 months, the number of posts of people of color being hired has been amazing to see. And again, we've all said, those are the gatekeepers, ultimately they have to be, you know, part of the solution, and they're going to be the ones that, because it trickles down to everything else. And that's really exciting. So join that group on Facebook and just watch and see how every day there's just this new people getting, you know, exclusive deals with studios that before was just impossible. I'm definitely hopeful as well.
So we're almost at time, and there's a question that I think has a lot of layers and could go in many different ways. But the story is from a person first named Ricky. They identify as a white man in their late 20s, and they have a film that's playing at the festival right now. You can read the full story in the Q&A. But their question to the panel is, if you have advice for white men who are telling underrepresented stories. And I think, again, I think this question can go in many, many different ways. So I'm
Yeah, can we unpack that a little bit? What does that mean? Like advice for white men telling underrepresented stories. As a white man, are you the director? Are you the writer? Are you a producer?
I'll read the story real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So the full text of what he sent is, I am a white man in my late 20s. I directed the film Not Just Another Day that's playing right now at the SLO Film Fest. It's about a Black man who was arrested for cannabis possession in the age of the multi-billion-dollar legal cannabis industry. As you may know, Black Americans are arrested for cannabis possession at a rate of 3.6 to 1 compared to white Americans. I think that stories like this are the most important ones to tell. My goal as a director is to unearth injustices. It is my deepest passion. And so the question is, do you have advice for white men trying to tell underrepresented stories?
So my mama always told me that, especially if you're working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, you know that you've done your job well because you work yourself out of a job. So I would ask that your goal be that eventually a Black man tells that story. And I would, and I understand that where we are right now, you had the resources, you had the opportunities to be able to tell this story. And I'm, for one, grateful for it. I think it's an important story, but I would hope your goal would be to mentor and to give resources to and to support us in telling our own stories and your stories for that matter. Because like I said, we've got this broader view of you. Your view of us is limited because of your privileges. So I would say, I would hope that your goal is to be in a position. I mean, one thing I say all the time when white people ask me this is, how come nobody's told the story of how white people became white? Because that shit is full of drama. If we look at the history of whiteness in this country, there's plenty to say on that. So that would be something that I would encourage you to do, is to look at that, examine that, tell that story, and then take your resources that you have and utilize those to help other folks or to help folks of color tell theirs.
Thank you, Fanshen. Okay. So he needs.
Oh
you
no,
want to jump in? Oh.
No, I'm plussing up Fanshen. I think exactly. And if right now, if you have the resources to do your own films, did you hire a Black writer? Are you hiring Black PAs? Is your cast mostly Black and brown? Is your crew mostly Black and brown? And then also, yeah, exactly what Fanshen was saying.
Yeah, and I think that is an extremely great point. So he needs to bring up, again, at Full Spectrum, the work that we're doing, we do get stories now and then that are from people that identify a certain way, trying to tell another community's story. And I think, Fanshen, the wisdom that you shared, I think is extremely insightful and great. Like, yes, if you are in a position to tell this story, you have the privilege, the access to resources to tell it. I would then want to push further and ask, okay, so what are we doing to uplift the community that should have the privilege to tell this story? I think that is a great way to look at it. So we're at time. I want to create space for the three of you. If there's anything else that you want to share before we conclude.
I'm just honored to know these badasses, all three of you.
Me too.
Honestly.
This was so lovely.
So Heaney, we already are in touch. We gonna get in touch. Yvette, look for an email. You all should know that we'll all be collaborating in the future on many things. I'm many confident. Things. So keep an eye out for us.
Absolutely.
And Brian, it was great to meet you, and thank you for
thank you, Brian.
Yeah, Brian, thank you
so much.
Absolutely.
No,
and thank you to
Film Festival.
Yes.
Thank you, SLO.
And to those that are on that are here with us today, thank you for being here. We hope you
thank you
enjoyed
to
the
everyone for
conversation.
being here, and thank you to the community for putting this together.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. I heard there's a surfing event, which does not happen here in Chicago.
Surfing.
Right,
So
right.
I hope that that's, I don't know what it entails, but I'm excited to hear more about it. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye,
Have a good
everyone.
night.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.